Hello, this is Valentina from CNN, and today we'll be looking at ancient Egypt and modern Egypt.
Today we have a special guest to talk more about ancient Egypt and modern Egypt. Welcome, Asif Muhammad. Good afternoon, Mr. Muhammad.
Good afternoon. Can you talk to us about modern Egypt? So, since you're Egyptian, can you talk to us about to what extent can democracy help reduce inequalities in modern Egypt?
Yes, so several features of the Egyptian educational system may have contributed to perceived inequalities. Access to general secondary and college education, they have remained from kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, and this is a sign of competition taking place for accessing general senior secondary schools and universities.
Hi, so I'm Vanya, and I've been searching a little bit about Egypt, and I believe
Yes. So, to what extent have the discoveries of ancient Egypt improved our lives?
I think that the alphabets that they used in ancient Egypt were the hieroglyphs, and they used symbols, which were like 22 letters of the alphabet was represented by symbols, and later on these symbols used to build bigger words, and I think this evolved on the creation of the new alphabet that we know.
Thank you.
So another thing that I think it evolved was the paper and writing. So the Egyptians used a system called papyrus, which was a great evolving from carving stone into rocks, and it was created in 3000 BC. And I think it also evolved because they used the long time ago they carved the hieroglyphs in the rocks, yeah. And then after they created the papyrus, which was a bigger step of evolution.
So, were the Egyptians the first ones to create paper?
Yes, they were the first ones.
Okay, thank
What
you.
are some similarities and differences between ancient Egypt with other civilizations?
So I compared ancient Egypt to ancient China because they have a lot of similarities, for example, in their technology, in their geography, etc. So since they were both very isolated, they had to figure out how to do stuff on their own. So how to hold their government together, how to be able to feed entire populations together all by themselves. And also they had a similar irrigation system because they were both near rivers, which helped their economy enormously. So they had to figure out how to make that river as productive as possible. So in order to help the soil and feed families and to help their economy grow. And also they use those rivers to help their trade and economy grow.
Yeah, I heard that the most famous river in Egypt is the Nile River,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Wow, that is indeed very interesting. I would like to thank you for having me here today and for all of your attention.
Yes, thank you
Yes.
for your contribution with our
Thank you
interview,
for
Mr.
coming.
Muhammad.
Thank you. So they also shared a lot of similarities with their beliefs. So they both believed in afterlife. So ancient Egypt believed in afterlife, that when they died, they could relive, but not in a way with like a new life. They could continue their lives, and this is why sometimes important people killed their servants or their important family members, so that those family members would be with them in their next life, and those servants could be helping them in their next life. And ancient China also believed the same way, which is why the first emperor of China was buried alongside an army of terracotta, so he could be protected in his afterlife. Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about afterlife, I heard that they did a process called mummification, and this mummification was a process like that only the rich could afford. Yeah, like the pharaohs and like the really high societies, and it's really interesting because the servants used to take out the brains out of their nose and then after do the process, everything. I think that's really interesting. Yes. Thank you, Valentina.
Thank you
I
so much,
actually, what a coincidence. I have to go to Egypt because I have to resolve some problems there. But thank you very much
Of
for your
course.
time.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we will introduce Gabriel Knacki to answer some questions about modern Egypt.
Hello,
Hi.
my name is Gabriel Kinaki, and I'm gonna talk about how was the lifestyle of ancient Egypt. So first of all, ancient Egypt was consisted on on gathering materials in the Nile River, which is one of the most important rivers on Egypt history, and probably the one resource which made Egypt really great on ancient times. Also, at the time, nobles they used to paint pictures, and they supported the pharaohs. Um, every season, the landowner needed to give a portion of his harvest to the pharaoh as tax. Uh, horses, which were like really important for people that needed to gather, were only used by rich people, which gives me a point of inequality in ancient Egypt, because really the lower class made all the work and the pharaohs just received it. And so pharaohs they basically had a good life. Also, my friend Mr. Hendricks already mentioned in my teacher Mr. Hendricks, he already mentioned this in class, that pharaohs they treated themselves as gods, and you can see in their pictures they were like really skinny, but they were actually not, because their life was basically eat
Yeah.
and eat. So pharaohs were actually really fat, but so it's different from what they are introduced to the world.
So those drawings would make them. They wanted to show pharaohs as really important figures.
Yes, but they weren't actually the most important figure of like in cases of economy, in cases of like politics. They were actually the citizens, like nobles and landowners, and so like the ancient Egypt always wanted to like represent as the pharaohs as like something else.
Like a god.
Yeah, like a god. And yes, that is for today. Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, let's go to Egypt where Vanya is with Mohammed talking about gender relations and festivals of Egypt.
Hey Valentina, so I arrived here in Egypt and look what I found, our friend Mr. Muhammad.
Yes. So I'm here today to talk about the festival that happened in ancient Egypt, which was the Opet festival. It was like an ancient Egyptian festival celebrated annually in Thebes during the New Kingdom and in later periods.
Yeah, I heard that this festival is one of the most known in Egypt, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And in the second month of the lunar calendar, in celebration of Opet, the god Aemon, Mut, and his consort and Cons, their son, they made a ritual journey from their shrines at Karnak to the temple of Luxor, called Ipit Rest in Pharaoh called Ipit Rest in Pharaohic Egyptian, hence the name of the festival.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in Egypt, gender was a really main topic. In ancient Egypt, women were sometimes the pharaohs, which were the women of the really high society. In theory, men and women should have the same rights, but in practice, they didn't. Talking about the pharaoh, The first woman who became a pharaoh was Queen Hatshepsut. I probably know that you guys know her. She really enjoyed the respect of male. However, she tried her feminine power to show that she's more powerful than the men. Men actually were seen as the leaders of the society. Men were also considered superiorly physically and mentally. They wrote poetry and an act which women were rarely involved in. I have my special guest, Gabriel Kinak, once again to talk about the modern gender equalities.
Hello, Vanya. How are you
Hello,
doing?
how are you?
So I'm gonna talk about modern day Egypt. So since you know, Egypt was a really powerful country during ancient times, but during modern times they are having actually a crisis, and this is due to some of the things they done on ancient times, like deals with the Mesopotamians and deals with the Nubians.
Yeah, I heard Egypt had a definitely big decline, but that's another topic for another day.
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about how modern Egypt treats women nowadays. So, modern day Egypt, they treat women with respect, and unlike some of the neighboring countries, women are free to wear woman clothing. However, they frequently express modesty. Egyptian men will marry a woman who is not virgin. However, their attitudes towards them are much harsher than of the Western world.
Yeah, I heard that the women has more like power. Let's say the slave that ancient Egypt, but they are still known as the house women who take care of the children. And actually, a very interesting fact that men, if they needed to, they could even beat their wives to take more care and to do more harder work. And I think like a solution is that do you think like that if they Egypt apply more, let's say, gender equality, it will still change like in your like aspects?
Yeah, I think if they started applying the law with more frequency and more power, and to encourage people not to do that, and to encourage people that this is wrong, then I think women will be treated as equally as men, and this would change a lot in the modern day.
Thank you, Gabriel Kinak, for your time. Hey, Valentina, I'm back. Really nice trip. I loved Egypt. So, can you talk a little bit about the social pyramids and the modern day women in Egypt society?
So the ancient Egyptian social pyramid had a lot of different sections. So at the top were the pharaohs, the high priests, the nobles, the engineers, the doctors, the craftsmen, the scribes. So it wasn't like a caste. It was the lower the job you had, the lower in the social pyramid you were. So for example, if you were an engineer, you were in a higher social status than if you were a slave. So at the top were the gods. Egyptians believed that the gods were the most important part of the caste. So therefore it was very important for them to keep them happy, and they would kind of base their whole lives around keeping their pharaoh happy, since the pharaoh was the god on living earth. So this is why they would do a lot to please them. So ancient Egypt shows how unequal they were, because only pharaohs got to have a good burial and pyramids built after them. Even though the slaves and the other people did all the work, pharaohs were the only ones actually being recognized when they didn't really do anything. They basically had pyramids built after them, while all the other commoners had nothing.
Yeah, I heard that the slaves built the pyramids. Is that correct?
Yeah, they did build the pyramids. However, unlike some people might think, they actually were paid. So it wasn't that unequal.
Can you talk more about the modern day women?
So today women face a lot of inequalities, such as sexual harassment and all those horrible things that they didn't before. For example, in 2013, Egypt was ranked the worst country to be a woman, when in ancient Egypt, it was one of the best civilizations that recognized women the most. 83% of women that have said to be like harassed, only 12% of those women actually like went to the police and were recognized as like cases, which shows how unfair they are to women. So although women weren't like treated perfectly back then, they were still treated better than they are today.
Yeah, I imagine.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us in the CNN team.
I'm Valentina.
And I'm Vania. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.